Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Men on the Rocks. It is I, Bald Man Joe. This week we got a pretty chill episode. We're talking about interaction. We're talking about counter spells. We're talking about everything, any form of interaction really in the game. We're gonna kind of cover it. It's pretty good interaction. The format's been changing a lot. We're starting to see a lot more creatures rise up. Kind of some of the old guard, not necessarily falling, just shifting positions really. So, good time to talk about that all. Then also just a heads up, there's not going to be a new episode next week. Atlas is going to be traveling, and I got some life stuff going on. So we're just going to take a little bit of a break. We'll be back better than ever. But in the meantime, just come on down, get a drink with us. So you were thinking interaction suites.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we were brainstorming a topic, and I was going through my list in prep for the next 2 weeks, and I was like, God, what do I want to play? What's my counter suite look like? Like, I was really debating, like, cutting Flusterstorm from my list.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that before, and so the past week or so has been like a lot of like, should I play this counter spell? Is Stern Scolding good enough? Does it hit what I want it to hit? Does this hit what I want it to hit? Is Flusterstorm still relevant? All these things. And so that brought up the idea of, let's talk about interaction suites. And like, what pieces of interaction do you play in a deck, and why would you pick those pieces over similar pieces or different pieces? And kind of how we ended up here.
I think that's a good topic. I think that's pretty good. I think especially just because like, are you even like still considering the Fluster swap for Stern Scolding, or have you just like not seen it to know if it's been good or not?
Okay, so I have been tracking all of my games. Haven't seen Fluster, haven't seen Stern Scolding yet when I was testing with it, but I was tracking all of my games where I was playing with Stern Scolding, and it never mattered. It
never mattered?
Not to my deck, and I think it's just one of the unique intricacies of my list, where it's like super flexible to the point where the only card that I think it ever would have mattered against if I had it is like, I would have liked to counter a Vexing Shusher. However,
can't
that card's uncounterable.
Can't counter that card.
So, realistically, I didn't care that much.
Okay.
I had other ways, like Grand Abolisher lands, I can either just Mindbreak Trap it, or Force of Will it, or Mana Drain it, or I had a Channel Effect to play through it. So I wasn't really that concerned about that. Other people had interaction to deal with it, so I wasn't super concerned about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent a lot of time on Discord today talking with the good folks from the Mockstars server, and a variety of people over there have persuaded me that Flusterstorm is still good and that I should continue to play it. And that's what you were saying as well, is basically like, the card is so good when it's good. I'm just like, but it's not good when it's not good.
Yeah, I think that's just like me and you, or mainly you, just being like, I want the best cards all the time, always, which like everyone should want at the end of the day.
Look, I just want Flusterstorm to say non-creature spell, and then I'd be so happy.
I don't want that. I do want that,
be 0.5
but I don't
storm
want that
rounded down.
Yeah.
So it's like half a mana rounded down for each storm count.
Well, no, because that means it's just exactly.
It's 4 spike.
It's Spell Pierce.
Yeah. I just want it to be Spell Pierce with upside. That's all I want.
Yeah.
I want it to be Spell Pierce, but it gets better.
Why do I feel like there's I'm thinking of Miscast is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And that card's like, eh.
It's still not non-creature. It's instant or sorcery, just like Flusterstorm.
Yeah, just so, like because what's the other like counter spell that people play that is only instant sorcery? Just Muddle, right?
It's Muddle. There's Miscast. There's, I think that's it. But we were talking about the ups and downs of like Blue Blast and Red Blast and like what to play.
Are people considering Blue Blast now?
I was considering Blue Blast. Hits Breach, man. Hits Breach into a Nota.
It's pretty high. It is pretty high. I do like Blue Blast.
Unfortunately, I don't think anything quite made the cut compared to Flusterstorm. Legitimately, the card that I was closest to playing instead of Flusterstorm was a Null. That's it's an instant for 1 blue. It counters an enchantment or an artifact.
Puts on the bottom, right? No, I'm thinking of a different card.
Just counters it for 1 blue, counters an enchantment or an artifact. And I was it basically came down to, should I cut Flusterstorm for a Null, or should I cut Flusterstorm for Red Blast? And ended up being persuaded to stick with Flusterstorm, at least for now, until the creature meta gets even heavier. or breach enchantment artifact shenanigan stuff gets heavier, in which case I also probably end up switching to one of those two, because Flusterstorm is one of my cards where I'm like, but
Would
for
you ever consider
now,
like a Red
Fluster
Blast?
lives. Yeah, Red Blast as or a null in place of Flusterstorm were the considerations, and so for now, Fluster lives, but I'm gonna be keeping my eye on it.
Narrowly, it lives. Yeah. I don't know too much about counter spells. I think everyone that listens kind of knows that I'm pretty ambivalent towards me playing counter spells and putting counter spells in my hand. But I will say I'm a big fan of just like on board interaction, just like interacting with the board very heavily. That's very much where I tend to be. I really like my passive ways to interact with the board. My Mayhem Devils, my newfound love in Orcish Bowmaster.
The card is so good.
Every single time I've played that card, I'm like, yeah, this card's insane. This card is just
the game
nuts.
we played the other day, where it didn't realistically have that big of an impact on the game, like it still made itself known just by generating a 10/10.
It stonewalled your Kenrith, which is good enough. It was good enough. And especially like as you like increase your colors, basically, so long as you're in black and green for like Assassin's Trophy or like Abrupt Decay, like you're gonna have the world's options to you, even more so if you're in white. Like just any Abzan colors, like you have answers to literally everything on the board. Because I'm not even on Assassin's Trophy for not Blood Pod. I'm just on Abrupt Decay because it's uncounterable, and Soul Partition because it's like slightly better, slightly easier to cast Assassin's Trophy.
Me too. I've also cut Assassin's Trophy from effectively every list I can. Any list that's playing that I would be playing Assassin's Trophy in that also has white, I just play Soul Partition instead now.
It's just better.
It accomplishes effectively the same thing at most points of the game, but has the additional effect of sometimes you can use it to cycle your own creature, artifact, whatever. Which is really relevant. So like you can just use it to protect something that's about to get blown up. And the extra 2 mana is usually backbreaking enough to the point where people don't recast it unless the game just gets locked down and they have nothing better to do.
I mean, plus you're in white. You can just play your own Drannith Magistrate.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can even tutor that bad boy up.
Yeah, that interaction alone, like, just made me sold. Like, yeah, no, if you're on white, just play Soul Partition. You're already playing Drannith Magistrate because you're in white, so like it's just free. Plus, you can like you said, like if you have Dockside, you can cycle your Dockside. You can cycle a Dead Thoracle. You can cycle a Birthing Pod. Like crazy stuff like that. If you're on Planeswalkers, like I've been playing a lot of Tyvar, you can cycle a Tyvar. Oh god, Tyvar's been insane for me. I've been really like
that card. Is very strong.
Yeah, and like even just like, okay, cool, I'm gonna like just tap my Birds of Paradise again. It's just extra value.
Well, the crazy thing to me is that it recurs stuff without targeting, which is huge.
The fact that it doesn't target is insane.
It can't be swatted, and like while generally speaking, I feel like the picks are pretty telegraphed. Like there's a GA in the yard, you're probably gonna pick it up. Yeah. But sometimes like that's not what you're actually what you need is like an Orcish Bowmaster or a Dockside Extortionist, and so people will like Noxious Survival the wrong thing, Turn the Earth the wrong thing.
Or and then just go, cool, I'm gonna get the second best thing in my yard.
Yeah, and plus it fuels it too. So sometimes you go and like just flip something that's even better, which is nuts. So there's that. But if it lives a turn, it just turns into at minimum +1 mana off your creatures, which is pretty crazy.
I was thinking the other day as we were driving home from our games where Bowmaster, like, they had a hand in the game. I don't know necessarily if they like controlled the board absolutely, but they had a hand, and I'm just like, is being on a dork deck like good right now because of Bowmaster? I feel like everyone's gonna be playing Bowmaster as much as possible.
I think so. I don't think it's gonna kill dork decks by any means.
I don't think so.
I do think that dorks like Deathrite Shaman that have a 1/2 stat,
substantially better. Yeah,
they're gonna be substantially better now, just because. Like, even in the couple games that I've played with Bowmaster, and I have seen other people play while they control Bowmasters, generally speaking, Bowmaster only kills X1s unless crazy things are going on, and then it's generally you use it to remove stacks pieces, or you use it to remove things like Grand Abolisher. But in my experience at least, generally Bowmasters doesn't kill X2s. So I, as a Kenrith player, have had a lot of success where I'll stick a Kenrith and then I'll stick my Esper Sentinel and then I'll put one counter on it with a Bowmaster trigger on the stack from mine or someone else's, basically at a point where I don't think my guy's going to get shot. And after that point, my Esper Sentinel's just going to live. Doesn't, because not only am I going to be drawing more cards now because people have to pay 2 mana, which they're not going to do when they already don't even pay 1 sometimes. But nobody's going to feed 2 draws just to kill an Esper Sentinel.
No,
it's just not worth giving your opponents 2 more cards.
Unless it's like incidental, like someone's going crazy with like a Ristic
and then you're
Study.
Like, oh well, I guess we'll kill like the Archivist. I guess we'll kill this.
Yeah, we'll start
shooting things. But at that point, if people are storming off with a Ristic Study and there's a Bowmasters in play, and people just aren't paying and things like that, I feel like at that point there are more important things to be shooting than like an X2 creature, unless it's game warping. Like unless it's like Vexing Shusher or Grand Abolisher level threats, you're gonna be like, oh, well, I guess we'll just kill the person with the Ristic Study as much as possible because they're drawing so many cards.
Yeah, pressure them that way. That way, if they live, it'll be easier just to knock them out of the game.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like even controlling a Bowmaster, so you can do like you use your own Mayhem Devils off Treasure Cracks to kill Docksides and reset it as a combo, right? But even just the value of Docksides dying and then coming back in a counter list can be really, really strong. So I consider myself basically unattackable if I have a Dockside Extortionist up as a blocker and Kenrith, and a lot of other players do too. It's like, I'm not going to attack you with anything 2 power or greater because you're just going to block and cycle the Dockside, and that's really bad for the table, right? That said, even when I control a Bowmaster, have found it very unrealistic to shoot my own X2. Like, there's just no point where I'm dealing 2 damage to my own Dockside to cycle it. Like, at that point, I'm only getting 1 trigger on the Bowmasters, at which point I'm shooting an X1, or I'm shooting someone in the face for chip damage, or there's something else that I need to be worrying about. There's never, in my experience, been a point where I can be like, I'll just knock my Dockside off so I can cycle him later.
It's just trying to get the most value out of your trigger, really.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's really what you're trying to do. So obviously meta informs what your interaction suite looks like. Would you say your deck itself also influences that as well? Because I feel like for me, especially if you're on like Dockside plus like some sort of reanimation shenanigans, you should I at least try and keep in mind like, okay, being able to kill my own Dockside or being able to kill my own like ETB things to be able to cycle it for value, like this matters. That's why I like Lightning Bolt and a lot of things, just because it's super duper versatile.
Yeah, I usually choose my interaction suites because they're the most flexible. So like that's one of the reasons I swapped off Assassin's Trophy is it and for Soul Partition, because it and Soul Partition are going to hit the same things, but Soul Partition is more flexible in that I can use it to cycle my own stuff, protect my own stuff, and it's easier to cast. Exiling is generally stronger than destroying because people can reanimate their things, plus it feeds them a land if they're on basics, which, like, if I'm blowing up a Winota, their command tax is only 1 now, for example. So it's just like one of those things where I am going to select the more flexible spell. Similarly, Flusterstorm is one of the cards that I'm considering cutting because it is while it can create a lot of copies that are flexible, on the whole, it itself is a relatively inflexible card, being able to only counter instant sorceries, right? So something like, say, Red Blast is going to be a lot more flexible, being that it can counter any blue spell or it can destroy any blue permanent, which gives me answers to a lot of things, ranging from Thoracle to Tivit to Time Sieve, I guess, looking at Tivit, Ristic Studies, Mystic Remoras, like there are a whole slew of things.
Whole host of things, yeah.
Yeah, that Red Blast deals with proactively or reactively from when I draw it, versus Flusterstorm's only countering an instant or sorcery on the stack.
You could argue like instants and sorcerers are easily the most like important things in the world, but I mean, a lot of our discussion is so dominated by Bowmaster these days. But Flusterstorm doesn't hit that card. Doesn't care about that card.
Yeah, it's
and it's one of those things like, yeah, I agree. Like it's the most narrow counterspell in like your control suite. It's definitely a good idea to like look at other options, see what else like we can fit in for that slot.
Yeah, but to go back to your main questions, I think that the deck that you're playing can definitely inform what types of interaction you're running, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like in a control list like mine, I'm aiming for interaction that's really flexible, that hits a lot of different things, that can be used in multiple different ways, so that I can double up on combo card versus interactive card, right? If I have a card that is both a combo piece and a removal spell, or like some sort of counter magic or something like that, fantastic. Great example, Cloud Shift. That card is effectively Veil of Summer for all intents and purposes that I see it played most of the time, unless it's a really bad silence. Generally, I've seen it used to stop like a Chain of Vapor or an Abrupt Decay or something like that, because it gives hexproof. And so for that effect, Cloud Shift is effectively the same thing, where it makes your creature dodge the removal spell, right? Except it's more flexible because it's also a combo card. So a little bit of an example there. Another example of flexible interaction would be Slaughter Pact. So that's a removal spell for me.
Slaughter Pact has been huge.
Yeah, it's a removal spell for me, but it can also, I have a couple of different like jank things that I can do with Displacer Kitten, where it turns into a combo starter or a combo, like it's part of a loop. And so once again, that flexibility is really nice. That said, at least from my perspective, something that has a much more linear game plan, something that's like got a very focused plan A, they might not want something that's as flexible. Like it can do a lot of different things, but it's maybe not the best at one specific thing. And if you have a really focused plan A or B, you probably want something that interacts, that just primarily deals with whatever it is you need this card to deal with. So a great example would be like in Nas lists that play Red Blast is a fantastic card that you should pretty much just be running, because it answers Ristic Study and Mystic Remora, as well as dealing with counter spells for Nas. Like it's very good at answering all of those solutions that blue have to those storm style strategies, right? Well, another really good example would be like, and this one's going to be a little different, but Winota, their interaction suite is very specific. They do not play hardly any instance sorceries, right? But they do. Their interaction is on bodies, on creatures, like you were saying, onboard interaction, or it's very, very specific forms of interaction, like Deflecting Swap to protect Winota, or Red Blast to stop her from getting bounced. There's then you have other things that are a little more flexible, but they fall into your game plan, right? So like, there's a white 1 core spirit that exiles a non-land permanent CMC 4 or less when it enters the battlefield, and when it leaves play, its controller creates an XX.
It's from Battle for Zendikar.
Yeah.
I know the exact one you're talking about. Skyclave.
Yeah, Skyclave Apparition. That's what it is. Yeah. So like that card is an enabler for Winota, which is fantastic. But it's also a removal spell for your opponent's advantage engines, as well as their blockers for your enablers, right? So it's really flexible removal that advances your game plan. And so that sort of like leans into the more flexible thing, but it does one specific thing really good, and that's enable Winota and Winota's attackers that she needs to proc her triggers, because it'll get rid of the big bodies that can block it. All except the biggest of bodies. And so that's really good, right? And I think that's really what it leans into. Last example real quick. My other deck is Teferi Chainveil, and one of the biggest weaknesses of that deck is Collector Roof. Absolute nightmare if that card comes out. So I play Submerge as a piece of interaction. That card, it's relatively flexible. It can like answer a lot of different creatures, but if you're playing Oof, you're playing green. I assume that means that you're going to, if you're in 3 or 4 colors, you're generally going to be fetching for like Tropical Island or like Savannah or something pretty early, and then you're going to be putting your Collector Roof into play.
Your bayous and stuff,
yeah. Yeah, your bayous, exactly. So there's going to be a forest in play. And Submerge, while it is a 5-mana removal spell, if you're hard casting it, says that it can be cast for free if I control an island, which I promise I do. Um, or and
Mono blue, are you sure?
yeah, right. Or if an opponent controls a forest, so it doesn't even have to be the opponent who controls an oof, as long as there's even though that's like one of the more likely scenarios. But that is a great answer to oof because it doesn't just bounce it; it tucks it to the top of the library, and from there, I can mill it. I can counter it as it comes back down, similar to a bounce spell, but it's just one further step where it just gets that problem out of there. So that's an example of more focused. Like I have a plan A of like develop artifacts and ramp, and Collector Roof stops that, so I'm playing one suboptimal card, but it's a really, really focused answer to my specific problem.
Yeah, especially on like those focus decks, like I feel like it gets easier to narrow down your interaction packages to deal with like the crucial things that your deck folds to. Chainer, for example, like the entire interaction suite is centered around stopping or dealing with Grafdigger's Cage and Drannith Magistrate specifically. Like I think nearly every single removal spell I made sure hits it. Yeah, everything in that suite hits everything that I care about except for Slaughter Pact hitting Douthie, I think was the only miss, but even then, like everything that it hits clears everything I needed to do. And what's really fun in those like packages and suites and stuff is you can get really creative with what you're wanting to do. So towards the end of my time on Chainer, I'm a big proponent for Baleful Mastery. If you're not on Nas, big proponent for it.
Card is really good.
Because the thing that's really stopping it is it says 4 CMC in the top right corner, so your Nas hits you for 4. Then that turns a lot of people off for a removal spell. Like most people aren't even playing like Deadly Rock, for example. And if you're commander centric, like it's just more payoff and more protection for your commander. But Baleful Mastery just did a lot. I didn't have any like natural counters to like not Drannith Magistrate, like Thoracle, so it slotted in pretty effortlessly there as like a way to kill the Thoracle player. So it counters Thoracle, quote unquote. It was a political tool for me when I needed it to, because I needed to carry myself in such a manner that I need to provide reason to keep me around so I can try and win again on my turn. So it's like, hey, we need to deal with something. If you have a top deck tutor, I can get rid of something and give you the card for the answer that you're trying to tutor up. Like right now, like it's 2-for-1 right here right now. And it exiles creatures or planeswalkers, which planeswalkers never really came up, but it was super nice to have that option. Like even now, like now that I'm on not Blood Pod, like I'm still kind of figuring out my interaction suite for the most part. And I think that your interaction suite should be changing probably more often than your like game plan suite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it has to adapt to the meta.
It has to adapt, and you're going to figure out like what you're losing to more often than not. Like for example, I've been realizing that I need to be packing more things to do under my own rule of law. So I've been looking at other things like that, or just ways to like naturally clear out my rule of law and be able to just play further from there. I mean, for the most part, it's on pretty much every standard like removal interaction piece that I need. Let me pull up my list. I don't think I'm on anything like super duper crazy.
But it is one of those things where over time your interaction is going to adapt based upon, like you said, what you're losing to, and what you're losing to is going to change as new cards come out, because new people will implement new strategies that you're either already going to have some efficacy against, or you're going to find something brand new. Like Dork decks, for example, have a new enemy in Orcish Bowmaster. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that they need to consider now, whether their removal suite is going to answer Bowmaster effectively, because even if it's like mono green and it's like a fight spell, maybe you have a fight spell where you fight this 1/1 or something like that. You just need to make sure that you're adapting, right? And so as Thoracle became more present, people started playing less spot removal for Laboratory Maniacs, more counter magic for Thoracles and Consults, because that was something that needed to adapt. And we see now that there are a variety of ways to answer Thoracle, whether it's killing the player by forcing them to draw or stifling the trigger. Like there have been a lot of things recently that have developed, and metas are slow to shift. Players are slow to catch on and adapt on the whole. But a lot of these things start to come out, and then they'll catch on, and the new card will come out, the new big thing. You'll have to switch up your suite again, even if your primary game plan stays the same. Because a lot of these decks, like the core shells, have been the same for years on a lot of these decks if they're still around.
There hasn't really been a lot of shakeup really to really mess with those cores. I mean, it's been 4 years since we returned to Theros.
Something like that. It's probably longer than we think, to be honest.
Yeah, because I mean, like that was realistically like the last major shakeup in terms of like brand new win conditions. Like obviously new stuff has come out like Saw in Half and stuff like that, but for the most part, people are still Thoracling, people are still breaching. But I would be very shocked if we see more cards on that power level.
Yeah, I think it's even might have less to do with win conditions too, and just like with like hate pieces. There are so many
Mm-hmm.
good hate pieces getting printed now that
God, there's so many.
interaction suites might need to change to be a little bit less, maybe a little bit more flexible between offense and defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where and once again, Soul Partition is a great example of this. Like you can remove someone's stacks piece if you're playing offensively, or if you're playing defensively. Like you can X-file someone's breach if they don't have the protection for it, right? And yes, they'll get to cast again later, but it buys you a turn. Like not all answers are going to be optimal, but just things like this that are more flexible might start to be even more important if you don't have that really dedicated plan A.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like, and especially with things like, I mean, one in the past, like the recent year, I feel like we've been getting really, really spoiled for removal options. I mean, Beseiju and Otawara and Aganjo to a lesser extent are just powerhouse cards. That every time I see them, like I try my damnedest to never ever play those cards as lands if I can avoid it. Like obviously, like if my hand's cracked and my Beseiju is the only green source I have turn one, I really want to cast this door because my turn two is going to be insane. I'm gonna play the Beseiju for turn,
Yeah,
obviously, but
yeah. So you can
like
go land and then like ignoble hierarch, whatever, and then your opponent goes land Lotus Petal, Bowmasters kill your dork, and now you're really
yeah,
really sad.
yeah. Well, of course, of course.
Because it's gonna happen.
Oh, every time, every single time. But like the channel lands are insane. Like that's just
Yeah.
it. I think if anything, the channel lands specifically have really forced like this Drannith centered, or not Drannith centered, this like GA centered approach to deck building where everyone wants to hide behind Grand Abolisher, wants to hide behind Silence Ranger Captain. I mean, people were doing that, but there's such an emphasis on it and such an emphasis on needing to play through that. Like I consider things like twin shot snipers is pretty decent right now. Or like we've all been really high on Touch the Spirit
Dude,
Realm
Touch the
recently.
Spirit Realm is a crazy card.
Like it's that card just does like everything. It interacts through Drannith Magistrate, or I keep saying Drannith Magistrate instead of Grand Abolisher. I just have that on the brain. Interacts through Grand Abolisher. It hits everything. Like it's temporary, so like if you need you, the modes on it to either tempo someone or be permanent is such that like the difference is 1 mana, and that's a pretty decent bargain for tempoing something versus permanently removing something.
Yeah, especially if like you that one removal on the Grand Abolisher or the Breach or whatever is gonna stop them from winning, and now everyone knows they're in a position to win and can
Yeah, cat's out of
be
the
ready
bag.
for it next time. Or
Yeah.
if it comes down to like Thoracle in the stack under Grand Abolisher and you touch the Grand Abolisher out of existence, now like people can just blow out the Thoracle win with a counterspell, and you don't even have to worry about it like as much. Obviously, it's still a threat, but like it doesn't have to necessarily be the most pressing thing in the world.
No, not at all. How have you been feeling about Bolt these days? That's always been a weird one to me in the world of Commander, just because like you have a vintage card pool, but like is Bolt really that good enough? I really like it, especially if you're in like lower color. I think it's pretty good. I think once you start getting to like 4 and 5 color, it's potentially cuttable.
Yeah, as a 4 and 5 color player, I don't really play Bolt in many of my decks anymore, if any.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a phenomenal removal spell. It is really good. It can that chip damage. Sometimes someone gets really unlucky on a Nas flip as they're going low, and they get to 3, and you can try and zap them. I've seen it happen. It's not often, but it can
I've done it.
occur. Kills Drannith Magistrate. 3's like one of those special magic numbers, and Bolt hits that. But there's
It's not format warping enough.
yeah. Well,
Like
I was
it
gonna,
is
I was
like it
gonna
is in other
say,
formats.
like we have, like you were talking just a moment about the difference between 1 and 2 mana, and sometimes that's a lot, but sometimes it's not. And for
Mm-hmm.
just 1 more mana, we also get a braid, and when we're using Bolt to remove creatures most of the time, like the 1 mana does matter, but being able to blow up an artifact with things like Grafdigger's Cage and even I've seen a little bit of Weathered Runestone start to pop up more and more.
Ugh,
Things like Thorn of
savages.
Amethyst, Null Rod, like these things exist and they're not uncommon.
No, the no
Um,
rod, no rod is our friend here.
no, we don't. We want to use our treasures, but a braid for one more mana, you just get an entire new dimension, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that I think Bolt is fantastic, but like you were saying, we've been spoiled for a lot of removal options, and as we get better and better hate pieces, the format starts to slow down just incrementally more, and that makes those 2 mana removal spells that do offer a lot more utility more playable. And so
Mhm.
things like a braid that answer just game-ending cards for a lot of decks, such as once again, Graph Digger's Cage. I think that starts to take that slot more and more, especially as we see like the dependence on Nas as a primary win condition start to trickle down, like we have.
Mhm.
Um, like people will throw out their Nas's turn 1, 2, 3 or whatever, like super early Nas's, and then it gets countered. It gets countered. Like maybe you fight over it because you know you're winning if it resolves and you have the resources. But a lot of times people just throw out unprotected Nas, is what I've seen, and then their decks are built to grind better. And so you're throwing out that Nas. If it gets countered, it gets countered, and then you're going for your breach line later, which is actually your win condition. So
I mean, that's always been the case. Like Nas does not say win the game, rather does breach, but they're cards that get you there and secure your win very very handily. Yeah, and I think I think the main difference for 1 mana, honestly, is just 0 and 1. Like that's the only difference that I'd say that 1 mana matters substantially, because being able to do something on your turn 1 with 0 mana substantially different than needing to do your turn 2 or your 2 mana play on turn 1. Like these are whole different ball games that I feel like as soon as you get past the distance from 0 to 1, like 1 to 2 is not crazy, 2 to 3 is nothing, 3 to 4 is kind of whatever, and then anything up beyond that is most. I feel like you're trying to like cheat something or do something else, like bring that cost or like
right,
make that mana efficiency more efficient, I guess. That like that 2 to 3 range, kind of whatever, honestly. Like obviously 1 mana removal interaction and 0 mana removal interaction, obviously that's king, right? But we can only play one Force Field, we can only play one Pact and Negation.
no, I would totally. I think you actually hit the nail on the head there, where that 0 to 1 difference, and like
Mhm.
turn 0 to turn 1, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
That is really critical, and I think the reason, at least for Bolt, for me, it's like, and I think with a lot of like removal, like counter spells need to be
as
online for
efficient.
that
Yeah,
0 to 1, because
yeah, they
if
need
someone's
to be as
going for a
efficient as
Thoracle
possible.
or an Adnaz or something before you even untap, or like while you only have that 1 mana in play,
Mhm.
you need to be able to answer it, right? But if somebody's going for like Dranith Magistrate on turn 1, like not every deck, but a lot of decks can be like, okay, that's fine. I'll just hit my land drop on turn 2, and maybe even my land drop on turn 3, before I braid the Dranith Magistrate,
And
or
then pop
the
off from
Collector
there.
Oof, the Null Rod, whatever it is, and then go try and do my thing. Like they can afford to let those creature-based, artifact-based hate pieces sit around for a moment or two, um, and then find their window and the correct moment to remove those, and then try and go for it as they untap, right?
Mhm.
So I think that the difference there on Bolt is that why would we want to kill a Dranith Magistrate on turn 1 unless we are like a Rogue Rack deck? In which
Or
case
like
we're
Tivit or
like
something.
maybe, I mean,
But
even
we can't.
Tivit, right? Like
We can't play Bolt and Tivit. But like the point remains, like
yeah, like
that's a deck that wants to cast their commander as
early,
soon as possible.
but like even then, like are you really care about removing Dranith on turn 1? Like
Mhm.
maybe you have a God Hand on and Tivit on 2, but then you probably don't have the cards to. If you're doing Tivit on
Support
one
that,
or
yeah.
two, you probably don't have the card to remove the thing, right?
Probably.
But like I think even then, a lot of the time we're okay to just say, okay, well, we'll just sit for a turn or two, play control stuff, develop a value engine, and then kill the thing, slam Tivit, and just windmill slam that time save down immediately following, and just 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I have been, as soon as I moved off of Rakdos, I'm like, I don't think I need Bolt. I have more removal options, and I feel like if I want to play Bolt, I'm gonna play Path to Exile before I play Bolt. Now
Oh,
that I'm
for
in
sure.
white,
Yeah.
which is that's a card that I still am surprised people just don't run. Like I see like creature specific bounce spells. I'm like, just Just play Path to Exile. Just better.
I think that runs into the flexibility thing where they're also in red and they're like, I want to abuse my dock side, and it's like, I get that, but
yeah, and I get that, and that's kind of something that I touched on earlier. Is like if your removal spell can function in such a way that, like through a breach, for example, you can kill your dock side that you already established early on to be able to recast it. Like that matters a lot, and that will come up. God, I wish there have been a lot of times where I'm like, man, I wish I could like Assassin's Serve my own dock side right now to be able to recast it. Great.
Oh man,
but
yeah.
I mean,
I would be playing Assassin's Trophy if it could hit your own stuff.
I mean, yeah, Abrupt Decay exists for that reason though, and that basically, that's actually another one. Abrupt Decay. To me, at least, these are like modern, like they were / are modern, like all-star like removal spells. That like I feel like on first glance to Commander and CEDH specifically, you think like, well, these cards just don't hit enough. They aren't flexible enough. But I think that there's one line of text on Abrupt Decay that kind of changes everything. That's this spell can't be countered.
Yeah.
And most of the things that you care about are going to be under 3 mana. Every Rule of Law creature and every Rule of Law effect that is commonly played is 3 or less. Drannith Magistrate, Breach. If you need to blow up Mystic Remore, if you need to blow up Rhystic Study, if you need to, like a good chunk of commanders are at 3 CMC. It kills Tymnas, it kills Malcolms, it kills Rograx if you want to kill a Rograx for whatever reason. Like it hits 3 sounds like you're capping yourself, and you want to go, well, maybe Abrupt Decay is better. It's the same mana cost, but it hits more things. But being able to remove that critical stacks piece that the blue player has, and they have counterspell, and you can kind of just laugh in the face of like, I'm going to remove your rule law. You can't counter this. Do you have Mindbreak Trap? No? Okay, goodbye. Like that's such a huge play pattern that I think that at the very least, like, honestly, Abrupt Decay could probably be 2 CMC. I think 3 CMC is really good, but it could probably be 2 CMC and probably see a decent amount of play, I think.
Abrupt Decay is 2 CMC.
I'm sorry, it only hits 2 CMC or...
okay.
My bad.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it
hits
3 and less. Honestly, it could probably hit 2 and less. It'd probably still see a decent amount of play, because at the very least, kills Breach uncounterably. Which, if you can kill a Breach uncounterably, sometimes that matters if they just, like, LED pitch Pact Negation with the live graveyard.
True. I don't know. Maybe I would... I don't know. I'd have to definitely reconsider Abrupt Decay if it were only 2. I think you need to
recontextualize everything, but yeah.
But yeah, being uncounterable and hitting 3 and less, more than enough. That's actually, when I consider my interaction suites, I actually constantly pull from like control pools from like Legacy, Vintage, and Modern. Like I'm constantly looking at the card pools in those types of decks that I would consider similar to my brews, to see what are they playing that CDH isn't already just jamming into the lists by default. Because like obviously, like if you're in your Legacy or whatever, you're playing your Force of Wills and things. CDH plays Force of Wills, blah 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 blah. Modern plays Force of Neg, blah blah blah. We have all these things that are just gonna exist in both formats. But sometimes you run into just a gold mine of a card where it's like, oh wow, that seems like a really strong card. Let me try that out in CDH because they were playing it in Pioneer or in Modern or whatever, and it seems like it does a lot of the same things that pop up in CDH, pop up in Pioneer here. And so, because I think our format is a really unique one where, because the card pool is vintage card pool, but you aren't playing duplicates, so, and you have access to this extra card outside the deck. So there's a lot of overlap between formats, and things are playing combos from Vintage and Legacy, but also they're playing combos from like Modern and Standard even sometimes. Like you'll look at like different Planeswalker combos and 5-color Sisay and stuff like that. Like all these different areas come together in CDH, and so considering what's relevant and what's relevant to your deck, to your game plan, and pulling removal and counter spells and things like that from those other formats, really useful for me.
Would you say that it matters more for the removal versus the counter spell, or do you like not even like differentiate those two?
Honestly,
in your head?
The only difference I have between those two in my brain is permission versus removal is like it's on the stack versus it's on the field. But if I'm saying interaction, I'm talking about both, at least everything, in my brain. Like, and I classify most of my counters and removals as interaction, just in general. I'll say my interaction suite looks like this, and I'll rattle off the Force of Will and
And the Slaughter Pact, for
Besage You,
example.
Slaughter
Yeah.
Pact in the same breath, like all of those things, because to me, like they're all just as important, especially when they're not all filling the same role. Because especially when you're playing singletons, sometimes you draw it early, that counterspell's great. Sometimes you draw it later, and you really need a removal spell. So
And that flexibility is just better there.
yeah, and like things like deck formats like Modern, at least up until recently, they were playing a lot of different types of removal that was really efficient because that's what they had access to. Whereas formats like Legacy are going to play like Force of Wills and Days and things like that. They're going to be playing those counter spells, and so you can like look to different areas for different types of interaction. But that's one of the things I do is I just like sift through these random lists. I'm like, oh, that seems really cool. Let me think about if that's actually useful in our format.
Mm-hmm. I guess to me, again, this is the counterspell hater speaking here, so take this with a grain of salt. I feel like most of like the good counter magic is like pretty known and documented. I feel like a counterspell needs to be incredible or highly modal and affordable to like break through established norms.
I think you're definitely correct. One of the ones that like examples from recent history would be Offer. When Offer got spoiled, a lot of people said this card is unplayable. Giving my opponent 2 mana is the end of the world because ad nauseum exists and like removal spells. Like it's so terrible. And now we look and like so many lists are playing Offer.
It's standard at this point.
Yeah, maybe not every single deck that's on blue, but if you're not playing it, you've at least considered it because it's such a catch-all. And 2 treasures, while it can be impactful, isn't usually the end of the world when you're countering a game-winning spell, right? And so it goes back to that whole Flusterstorm thing where it's like you're either you're ending the stack with it, so those 2 treasures don't matter, or you're starting it and baiting out your opponent's second counter spell, and then you're hitting it with another one. Like there's different ways to use that card, and there's definitely a right way and a wrong way. A little bit further back is for a long time, Swan Song was considered a super mid card because it only hit 3 card types.
Wait, really?
And it gave your 2. Yeah, when that card first came out, a lot of people were like, Swan Song's good, but I don't want to give my opponent a 2/2 that they can sacrifice or like hit me with or something like that.
What's the context for it? What format? What context
Cedh
was that in?
years ago, like back when it first got printed. Once again, it's like
Really?
the whole Offer thing. Yeah. I heard a lot of people saying this card's like meh.
I mean, it hits 3/4 of the non-creature. It misses artifacts and it misses planeswalkers.
Yeah, 3/5.
Yeah. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And enchantments are way more relevant, at least nowadays, way more relevant than artifacts.
Yeah, and like it could have just been the pool of people that I was talking to at the time, like the different things that I was reading at the time. But yeah, and also CDH wasn't as well defined as it was back then. Countering creatures was way more relevant. Like people were playing Forbid in some lists. This is like back when Damia was like one of the top tier lists. Because there were no like ranked CDH events or anything like that. The format was not well defined. It was just people playing at a really high power level, playing the most efficient stuff they could, and their card pool was smaller. And Swan Song basically read counter a counter spell, maybe counter a board wipe, like because creatures were kind of like the thing to be doing, even if they were like 4 and 5 mana creatures. This is Rune of the Hidden Realms was like scary like and those cards just
I still love Rune personally.
They're still super cool, very good, but like didn't scale as well. And Swan Song scaled incredibly well as the meta shifted and changed, and non-creature spells, instants and sorceries, winning at instant speed, tutoring all the time, those became the things to be doing. And Swan Song was a fantastic 1-mana answer for those, because that 2/2 bird didn't really matter in a 120 life opponent format.
Yeah. Board wipes. You mentioned board wipes. I do want to talk about board wipes a little bit. Underrepresented, I think, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure.
I feel like the punt. I feel like the board wipe to punt conversion is very, very high. I think is the trade off there is the reason.
That's also true.
Because I mean, unless you're trying to develop something crazy or stop like the green white player who folds to a singular board wipe, it's so easy to just toss a game by just board wiping, by just like toxic deluging for 5.
Yeah. No, I would
But
agree.
but even still, like I don't know, I'm still waiting for like the good board wipe to come out, like the offer you can't refuse of board wipes, I guess. I
Right.
think the closest, honestly, I'm surprised Out of Time doesn't get played as much as it I feel like it should. I think if it were 1 and 2 or 1 white and 2, everyone would play it. I think the double white pip puts a lot of people off
I don't
personally.
think that's actually. I think so. So specifically for that one, I would, at least for me, I would never play Out of Time, even if it were only 2 mana.
Mm,
You phasing your own creatures as well. It's impossible to get those things back, basically, unless you let everyone else's stuff back in too.
mm.
I would never play that card. I would. I think that, and I think that's the reason that Out of Time doesn't see that much play, is because phasing your own creatures is so much worse than blowing them up. Because if your deck is built to recur
True,
them,
true.
if you care about having like 1 or 2 creatures and your deck is built to get those back, you don't really care that much. But if you make them cease to exist, and they're locked out of the game forever, it gets a lot harder. Especially then you try and go and remove your own Out of Time, your own enchantment, and people are like, "Wait a minute, why are you doing that?" And they'll like stop you from doing that, and it just locks out your own game plan, whatever that is, right? Maybe
Okay.
not necessarily the most important thing, but like the decks that do play it tend to be like more turbo-y Mardu decks. So like Dihada Shells, or things like there was another deck that was playing Shorikai, was
Oh yeah,
playing
that makes
it,
sense.
like because your commander's not a creature, you don't care. So things that don't use commanders as creatures, or things that play few to no creatures, so like polymorph lists that have white. I'm thinking that Commodore Guff, when he gets representation in CDH and gets after he gets printed, which I'm sure he will, that deck will probably play Out of Time. But that's also a polymorph list again, so probably
Okay.
probably like that's where I see Out of Time falling short, is that it locks your guys out permanently.
Okay. What does a board wipe need to do for you to even put it on the table then, like for consideration? Like dress down, I think it might be the closest to like one of the best board wipes in our format. Like outside, like I guess best I contextualize as like Toxic Deluge, Fire Covenant, and like Psych Rift.
Yeah, I think so. From my perspective, I think we don't in CDH. I think that we don't really like board wipes on the whole.
You don't think so?
There's one exception that I'll get to later, but I think on the whole, we don't really care for board wipes. What we like are sweepers.
Mm-hmm.
And I make the distinction there is like board wipes typically say destroy all creatures, at least in most people's minds. Sweepers are going to clear some aspect of the board for some duration of time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the difference there is that like Fire Covenant is not a board wipe, at least to most people's minds conventionally, because it's not clearing
Okay.
the entire board. What it does is it sweeps a lot of the problematic creatures off the field into the graveyard, and so I would call that a sweeper. It's a little bit of like semantics, but to my mind, that's how I think of the things, right?
I think that is an important distinction to make, though.
And I think that that also comes into play with Toxic Deluge. Toxic Deluge, sure, it's a board wipe. It kills all the creatures, but it's not a board wipe in the context of like it's destroying all. Like it's not a Supreme Verdict. It's not a Wrath effect, which is what board wipes in some players' minds, in mine at least, think like that's how I think of a board wipe as a Wrath effect.
Mm-hmm.
A sweeper is something like Toxic Deluge, where it's going to neg X. So you can't give your creature indestructible. You can't give your creature blah 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 blah. Cyclonic Rift is another example. I don't think anyone would call that a board wipe really, because you're not clearing, you're not killing all the things, which is what board wipes tend to denote. It's just like it's sweeping all of the things off the field. Plus, you can Baby Rift, which is just like a spot removal spell.
Yeah, there's that flexibility we talked about.
I would say the one board wipe that is played in CDH that people really like, and I guess it's technically two, because you have Supreme Verdict is played in some lists like Shorikai, like those really niche lists that don't care about creatures and just want a really solid answer. Um, the other one would be and it's a conditional board wipe, Culling Ritual, because it says destroy and it
True.
says
True.
all. Mine, yours, everything. There's no X cost associated with it. It's everyone's, and it's a sorcery. So even though it's in, once again, semantics, but in my mind, I see Culling Writ as a conditional board wipe. It's blowing up all the non-land permanent CMC 2 or less. And I think that card's super great because you get something for that.
You get a lot of something for it.
You get a lot of something for that. The card is fantastic, and it sees a lot of play. It sees a lot of victories come out of it, right? But like you mentioned earlier, I think the punt to sweeper ratio is really high because if you're not careful, if anyone has any tricks up their sleeve after all the stacks pieces go bye-bye, then
you're just passing to the winner.
You're just passing to the next person.
Yeah.
And they're going to win. It's the whole like can't pass to the person to my left after I wheel conundrum, right? So and I've played a number of games where it's like someone pops a Culling Writ because they're scared of what's going on and they want to set up for their win next turn. They pop the Culling Writ, maybe play their commander, pass turn. They didn't even attempt to win. They were just set up. Well, guess what? Nobody has any resources left. People didn't tap their rocks because they tapped for more colors than their lands. They were not anticipating Culling Writ, and now we can't counterspell person to your left Storable. Or someone toxics at X5, like you said, and the whole world just ends because Archon disappears, Op disappears, like every stacks piece that's on a creature just evaporates. And maybe you try to win now, and then you get Force of Will, and then you have to pass, and now person to your left just tutors for whatever they needed and wins the game because there's nothing holding them back.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you're designing most of your decks, are you putting a board wiper, a sweeper in this case, like in? Are you trying to keep that in mind? I guess the easy answer is Cyclonic Rift. Like that just goes into
always
everything.
Playing Rift in every blue deck. I'm always playing Rift. Some people don't. It kind of it's
wrong.
I have heard the argument that it's meta. I've heard the argument it's meta dependent. Like apparently, and I have not played on the East Coast, but apparently over on the East Coast, Psych Rift is viewed as like a kind of like suboptimal, or like not suboptimal, but like a slightly upsided disperse, just because the games go super fast there. Apparently, everyone's like on really turbo strategies, and so games end very quickly. And you're never the thought is you're never going to get to the 7 mana to see that make a difference.
Yeah, but like the upside of like playing that over disperse is sometimes you bounce the whole board and win.
But why would you do that when you can also play Disperse or Chain of Vapor that bounces your dockside and will also accelerate you into a win? I don't know. Just differences in meta,
okay,
right?
Yeah, I guess.
Over on the West Coast here, it's really a lot stacksier. There's a lot of control running around. A lot of like rule of laws, things like that. So it's just different approaches to play. I haven't played in a meta that's supposedly so turbo, so I don't know if Cyclonic Rift is actually good or not. That said, when building my decks, I generally try to include, I'm always including at least one sweeper, because for the metas that I play in on a regular basis, and for my own personal preference, Cyclonic Rift is a phenomenal card. I don't care about bouncing my dockside Extortionist all that much. And
you've kitten for that.
Exactly.
That
I got
matters
other
no
things.
more.
I can sack it. I can recur it. I can do other things. And so Cyclonic Rift is like a good removal spell. It's also just a fantastic panic button. So I'm always putting that in as a blue player that I am. But then, other than that, sweepers, I think I definitely consider other cards like off and on. Like I've considered playing Winds of Abandon at a point. I've considered playing Supreme Verdict at a point. I've considered playing Toxic Deluge at a point. Right now, I've settled on Fire Covenant, but I wasn't playing that until recently, and that's just because the meta's been getting even more creature heavy. So I wanted another spell that could answer multiple creatures at one time. So like, and it's an instant, which is fantastic because that's kind of what my deck wants to do.
All upside.
I don't use all upside. I don't use my life total, so don't really care about that. It's not a blue spell, so it can't get red blasted.
It can get blue blasted though.
It can get blue blasted. Gotta watch out for that one. But yeah, there's it can the thought process is like, because we have a lot of stacks here, I can fire off a covenant under rule of law and nuke the rule of law and the oof and the like the Dothy, for example, answers 3 things with 1 spell after everyone else is locked down and passes to me, and I'm gonna now I'm gonna go present my win, and like try my shot at it, right? So Fire Covenant's a great card. It's also just really flexible. Once again, I value flexibility, and it can
Kills
be
your own
used.
Dockside. Kills your own Gilded
It
Drake.
does kill my own Dockside. I've done that before. I've shot my own Gilded Drake before. It can also be something as simple as, well, a tempo play that I've done before back in the day when I was playing Najila was like, I'm in like third or fourth seat or whatever, and I open with Land Crypt after everyone else has gone Dork, and I just do Toxic on 1 or 2, just clear everyone's Dorks and just time walk them, right? Fire Covenant can do something super similar, but I can even use a Dork to accelerate into it, where I go Land, Dork, turn 2, Land, Covenant, shoot everyone else's Dorks. And everyone else's creatures they deployed on turn 1, and now I'm really far ahead just because I have a mana Dork. So it's a really good card, but I don't generally. I include one sweeper always, Rift, and I consider others depending on my strategy. I guess is the best way to put it. In Chain Veil, I'm only on Dress Down, just like, and that's not even a sweeper. It just clears text off cards for a turn,
which is really all you need.
I don't think I'm on any other sweepers in that list. And my other decks, I generally play. If I'm playing a Sultai list, I'll be on Toxic. If I'm playing other colors, I might be on Verdict. If I'm on a blue-white polymorph list, I don't generally play sweepers though. I prefer to be a bit more surgical in my approaches.
I think like as the format has moved forward, we have cared and valued more surgical versus more wide-reaching things, exactly for like the board wipe to punt conversion.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just
like even still, like I'm not playing Toxic in my list, but I'm also a Dork list. I play a lot of creatures like Dork. I miss Toxic every day I play this list.
It's such a strong card. It really, really is. It answers so many things, but also sometimes you really need that rule of log on, but you also really want that Collector Roof to stay around.
Yeah.
And Toxic Deluge doesn't allow you the ability to differentiate between those. You're like, I'm either killing one of you or I'm killing both of you.
I should probably find a slot for Fire Covenant, I think, in my list.
Card is S tier, as I've been told. And I agree. I think that sweepers are really, it's a hard thing to include because generally speaking, the really good ones are really expensive to cast, like Rift, Overloaded Rift. And so you don't want to like play too many of those, and you don't want to play them at sorcery speed if you can avoid it, because then you just let everyone else get a turn to rebuild, right? And so then you end up playing the cheaper ones that aren't technically as good, like Toxic, phenomenal card, but it doesn't allow you to like have any form of asymmetry. Like your cards are getting nuked just as much as your opponents, and you can't protect any of the stacks pieces you want to keep around. So it's like really efficient mana wise, but you're kind of losing out if anyone else is ready to pop off immediately after that. It's just one of those tricky things to balance, right? So like Winds of Abandon, fantastic card. It's also sorcery speed and 6 mana and double white pipped. So like it's asymmetrical and it's clearing all your opponent's stuff permanently, but you're also paying 6 mana at sorcery speed with 2 white pips. Like that's hard
to do.
Your
whole turn.
That's your whole turn, and like you're hoping that it damages your opponents enough that they aren't just winning the game; they're spending their entire next cycle trying to recover. So I don't know. It's really hard to balance good sweepers into a list, I think.
Yeah. And that's I think the conclusion I've come to with a majority of my sweepers and like board wipes is like outside Toxic, outside of Psych Rift, I guess to some degree Dress Down if you can play through Dress Down. Like if you're on like breach lines, like you don't really care about Dress Down, like it's pretty free include, clears all the stacks pieces for the one turn that you need to try. And if you fail, well the game's going to continue on. The stacks pieces are still going to persist because that Dress Down's going to die. So I've really liked seeing Dress Down in a bunch of different lists, but I think exactly correct. Like the requirement for a card to be surgical outweighs the wide-reaching as like value, I guess, of like a traditional board wipe or a traditional sweeper. Like it just again, it fixes that board wipe to punt conversion like better in your favor. So that way we aren't punting as much, but we are removing the things that we do care about that are preventing us from winning. But if we get stopped, like the critical parts are still around.
Yeah, it goes back to like touch, right? So that's a great example. It's like it's gonna get the thing out of there. It's gonna do it in a surgical manner, but it's going to bring it back at the end of the turn. So like if you're touching out a rule of law, then you can bring it back and make sure everyone else is still locked by it. And I think that's really important. But like, so from my perspective, I'll just play more removal. I'll play combos that go off under a rule of law, even if it takes a turn or two more to assemble them, or I'll just play more removal and I'll just remove everything I want to one turn at a time over the course of a game until I pop the rule of law or I pop the collect roof or whatever like the last thing is that's actually holding everyone back, and then I'll pop that one and try and go for it, or I'll let someone else do it and they'll go for it over the top of them. And that I think is also really important, is remembering that your opponents also have removal.
They also want that oof gone,
and they also want that oof gone. Like it's the whole idea of like the priority pushing, right? Like I'm in seat 1 and I'm pretty sure you have a counterspell, so I'm going to push it to you, make it your problem. Or like you're in seat 4 and we know that you've revealed a Force of Will earlier off your Thrasios, so we're going to push it to you and force you to counter this Thassa's Oracle. And so I think that's one of those things where it's like a lot of times stacks pieces are good because they host 3 opponents at once. And that's one of the reasons that being able to win at instant speed is so good. It's because you can spend your time setting up, developing engines, developing your combo pieces, even if you can't go off with them yet. And then 3 turns later, when somebody pops the rule of law or the collect roof or whatever to try and go off themselves, everyone's going to fight over that, try and defend the stacks piece or try and remove it again. And then you can profit off that because you can sort of like push the removal spell to someone else by saying, hey, like, I know that you need that rule of law gone in order to execute your breach, so I know you're going to try and remove it at some point, and then you just let them do that, and then you try and win after they're stopped or after that thing is removed over the top of whatever they're doing. And that's when I think that's where we see those silence effects like GA and stuff really shine. It's that whole rock, paper, scissors. It's like, I'm going to spend my time before that developing engines and stuff and a Grand Abolisher, so that when I remove that thing, no one else can go off over the top of me or stop me. Or I'm going to hit everyone with a sweeper, and I'm going to remove the stacks piece as well as everyone else's engines at once, so that no one can pop off over the top of me, and now I'll untap and win.
Or if I get stopped, I'm not at so much of a disadvantage that I can still like cobble something together and claw my way back in.
Crawl back into the game.
Yeah, that's basically all I needed to touch on. I really like interaction, just like in general. I'm a very big interaction enjoyer. I enjoy stacks pieces to some degree, but I mainly like the asymmetrical ones that I'm like, I don't care about this, but you hate this a lot, so I'm gonna play it. Like, I don't know.
Cruel.
I mean, hey man, this collect roof hits me too. I'm only on like 5 artifacts though, and I don't really care if they're shut off.
Yeah. Collect
But
roofs.
that Adnaz, that cares a lot about the oof.
Yeah, asymmetry is the word of the year, and I think that being able to deal with the stacks pieces very carefully is also really important, and that's my whole message of today's episode.
True. Just remember, board interaction is more important than counter spells. You heard it from your favorite Rakdos enjoyer here, and favorite blue hater. That's not true. That's such a lie. All right, well, yeah, that's about all I got. If you got anything else, Atlas?
Nope. We're chilling.
All right. We will catch you all later.